Well, there's an old saying that the person doesn't really have 25 years of experience, but 1 year of experience repeated 25 times. For those of us with MS, that certainly is not true, is it? Well, hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 38 years. I think I can sort of divide those 38 years into what I guess I think of as phases. They don't divide neatly into decades or any kind of time frame, and they actually sort of even overlap. But as I think about what symptoms that I've dealt with over the years that have impacted my life day to day, have most made me aware that I have multiple sclerosis and that it needs to be taken into account pretty much with every decision I make or every activity I decide I'm going to take on. I can see that there are 3 distinct phases of MS in my life so far. And I say so far because who knows what the future might hold. And there's bound to be more excitement going forward, but at least where we stand right now, that's where I'm at. And I can refer you to a video that I made back in January of 2021, my symptoms over 35 years, because back then it was only about 35 years. And that will give you a better idea of all the symptoms that I have had over the years. I am not going to cover those in this video. I'm just going to cover the ones that have been the biggest challenges for me or the biggest day-to-day obstacles for me to live the kind of life that I want to live. So starting in my 20s, as you may remember, I have had MS since I was 25 years old. The first phase of my MS is centered around the vision problems that I've had. Optic neuritis primarily. That was my very first symptom and certainly got my attention. But also, as time went on, nystagmus and oscillopsia. So the involuntary movements of my eyeballs that make it look like life is this very poorly made home movie that jumps around, and it's very difficult to focus on something, especially something that is moving. Well, all of those vision problems were definitely an impact on my life. I was working full time at the time, and I remember driving to work. I usually had to wear one of those eye patches. I looked like a pirate, because I otherwise couldn't really focus well enough on the road. Should I have been driving at all? Well, you can argue that maybe I shouldn't have. And in fact, some of my coworkers decided that perhaps they ought to start offering me rides so that I didn't have to drive myself. And I give them many thanks, and I remember them fondly for that. I remember one day I had to walk down to the grocery store to get a couple of items. My vision was very bad. I don't think I had figured out about the eye patch yet. So I was just trying to get down to the store, and the walk involved crossing a pretty busy street, and it did have a traffic light, but quite honestly, I could barely focus on the traffic light. I couldn't really tell what was going on. I made it, but it was quite an adventure. It also made just doing every other activity of life a little bit more difficult, or a lot more difficult, depending on what it was. I had optic neuritis, I don't know, probably 7-8 times over the first 7-8 years of having MS, and I have not had an attack of it since, and I'm not sorry, I don't miss that. But the nystagmus and the oscillopsia, they have stayed with me, although I have been doing some eye exercises, and if I am diligent at doing them, it helps an awful lot. And that's a good thing, because oftentimes with MS, there's not much you can do about it. And one of the things that we know about those kinds of symptoms is that we didn't do anything. Our lifestyle did not contribute to us getting that. It just happened, right? And we just dealt with it. So that was that phase. I think the second phase, and that again, there was some overlap here, but the second phase that seemed to most impact my life was balance kinds of issues. So my balance became rather poor. I didn't trust it, let's put it that way. It might be fine one moment and not fine the next. But that also has persisted to this day. Back then, I used to do an awful lot of, I don't know if you've ever heard of Volksmarsching. It's a German word. What we usually say here in the United States is Volkswalking, and it's just a guided walk. So you either go to a location and pick up a map, and then you do the walk, and then you come back and you get your book stamped. Sometimes it's a public event where there are other people on the route along with you, and that's a lot of fun. But my husband and I, we did walks of that kind all over the state of Washington, the state of Oregon, British Columbia. We were all over the place all the time, and we learned a lot about all the small towns in Washington and Oregon by doing that. And it was a great way to get acquainted with the states that we lived in. And I enjoyed it a lot, but I have to say that the balance and the dizziness, it kept things a little more challenging. I knew that I had to be very careful, and I never did hurt myself, so yay me. But balance around the house even. I've fallen on furniture a number of times. Fortunately, I have lots of nice overstuffed upholstered furniture to fall on, so I haven't hurt myself. But I have fallen on the floor. I've fallen on things. I thankfully never fell on my dog. I was always a little concerned about that. Never did do that. But balance and dizziness really did make life a challenge because I had to take that into account with every move I made. And then finally, the third phase, which is still very much ongoing, it may not be the final phase, is fatigue and all that goes with it. There's a lot that goes with fatigue, right? And we all know if you have MS, you know the difference between being fatigued and being tired. Being tired is usually the result of something, either overexertion or illness or something. You can say, that's why I'm tired. I didn't get enough sleep last night, whatever. But fatigue is a different thing. It comes upon you and you haven't done anything really to bring it on. You might have been very rested. You might not have overexerted yourself. But fatigue is just there. And it's a feeling that your limbs are very heavy, that everything that you undertake to do is so much more effort than it usually is or that you think it ought to be. That has definitely become the main challenge and obstacle of my life. And the other thing that I think that physical fatigue seems to be related to, so I'm going to kind of lump it in here. Maybe I'm wrong to do this, but I kind of don't think so. I've noticed, and I've said this before, that my emotional filter is not what it used to be. I used to have a lot of emotional self-control, and I certainly had to put that to the test because I was a manager in a company and I had to deal with all kinds of situations. I never lost my temper. I never cried. I never got visibly impatient. I mean, I was really pretty even keel and calm outside, at least, even if inside I was feeling certain emotions. I was able to power through those and not let them show. But I don't have that ability anymore, especially with frustration, which for me ends up being displayed as little, I used to call them micro rages, but they're kind of expanding to where they're not really so micro sometimes. I get way over the top being angry. I don't like that, but I think it's part of the fatigue thing. I really do think it's all related to fatigue. I have to research this a little more and see if I'm just making this up or if it really is true. I'll let you know if I do find out anything about that because it would be good to know. But I guess there isn't a lot I'm able to do for fatigue. I was on amantadine for a while, and I might talk to my doctor about whether I can go back on that again, at least for a little while. It did seem to help, but by and large, you just kind of have to live with your fatigue. And that kind of gets to the point that I wanted to make here too, that I see this whole dealing with MS thing as kind of an equation in a way. And now here's kind of what I'm thinking. I'd be curious to know if this makes any sense. But what I look at the equation as disability equals the symptom that you're dealing with minus any accommodation that you can make, or the flexibility that you have about a certain thing, or the attitude that you maintain throughout dealing with this thing. Back when I had the vision problems, the equation came out pretty well because I was able to accommodate the vision problems to an extent. And I certainly had a good attitude about it because I loved my job and I was determined. I was going to go and I was going to do a good job and I was going to live the life I wanted to live. And since I had enough energy to get through all that, I was able to pretty much do that. So I think on the whole, I didn't feel all that disabled. And again, with the balance and the dizziness, I had a good attitude and I was flexible. I realized that there were certain things I better not put myself in a situation where I had to balance on a narrow log going over a stream or something. That wasn't going to work too well. So I just avoided those kinds of situations, but I was still able to do what I wanted to do. And so if disability equals the symptom minus how you can accommodate it and what your attitude is toward it, I think on balance, I didn't feel all that disabled. Well, here we are in phase 3. The fatigue and its attendant mood problems, or emotional dysregulation, I think you'd call it. Now the equation seems to be a little bit different. If we say that the symptom you're dealing with minus your ability to accommodate it, to be flexible, and to have a good attitude, the fatigue thing, that has kind of changed the game for me. Because can I accommodate it? Well, I thought I could. I thought, okay, well, I used to love going on long walks. But if I can't do long walks, I can just do stuff inside the house and that will be fine. Some days that works okay, but more and more often, what I'm finding out is that the fatigue of my fine muscles keeps me from doing anything like handwriting or doing tasks around the house that require any kind of fine motor skills. Forget taking up knitting or crocheting or even doing jigsaw puzzles. I would probably be pretty clumsy at doing any of that. Doing dishes has become even hard for me. So my husband and I mentioned this in a video a few months ago. We invested in some Corelle to replace some of the heavier breakable dishes that we had because I just was not able to really accommodate myself to those dishes, which I like very much, but I just can't use them anymore. So here I am with this latest installment of multiple sclerosis, and I'm just thinking that the equation itself has a different outcome than the earlier phases, where I'll never say the equation totaled out positive, but I think it neutralized the negative effects of MS a lot more in the past, with my vision problems in the beginning and my balance and dizziness in the second phase. The fatigue thing, I definitely would have to say it's having a more negative effect on my life than the other phases had. Now, I don't mean by saying any of this, I'm not trying to come across as whining and complaining. So I hope you understand that. I'm just sharing and observing how MS has changed in my life. And even though I have 38 years of experience of accommodating MS and being flexible and understanding that I can work around a number of things differently from the way that I used to do them in the past, but I can still do them, even given all of that. The fatigue and the emotional dysregulation that seems to be going along with it, much harder to get any kind of a neutral outcome than I had before. But I am not done working on that. And if anyone has any suggestions, I would love to hear them, because I would love to get that equation to be a little bit more balanced than it is right now. But that's all I have for you today. I just wanted to share some observations and see if perhaps you can relate, if that is something that you have been dealing with yourself and you can understand what I'm going through and you want to leave me a comment. I would love to hear it. So until my next video, take really good care of yourself, and I'll be seeing you again the next time I post a video.